Hello and welcome to my new project video, which picks up right where I left off in my previous one. That was all about making my outfit to wear to see Taylor Swift's Eras Tour last year. At the end of that video, I mentioned that I fell down a Swiftie Sewing Project rabbit hole, with the blue folkmore dress Taylor debuted for the 1989 Taylor's version announcement being instantly added to my project wishlist. And now the time has come to make this dress. It seems like the stars aligned for this, given that I found the perfect fabric to use for this project. And what better time to make this dress than now, before August slips away into a moment in time. Before I begin, let me show you the design for this dress. I will be staying very close to the original design sketch by Alberta Ferretti, which is for a sky blue dress with a slightly pleated V-neck bodice, full-length circle skirt and long drapey sleeves. The back of Taylor's dress seems to be made up of a full lace panel, but I decided to deviate from that, instead having the back mirror the front with a V-shaped neckline as well. There's some scalloped insertion lace running down the sleeves, as well as some scalloped edging lace at the skirt hem, along the neckline and around the waist. To add some bling for the stage lights to reflect off of, there is a smattering of hotfix crystals applied to the lace. Now let's take a look at the materials I've chosen for this dress. Since I've made the decision to try and use natural fibers as much as possible in my future sewing projects, I found a nice sky blue cotton voile for this dress. It was ever so slightly sheer and lightweight enough to have a similar drape as the original fabric used for Taylor's dress. As for the lace trims, I found this beautiful scalloped tulle lace in a matching color to use for the insertion lace of the sleeves, with this edging lace for the hem and neckline. A wider scalloped lace trim was perfect for the waist accent. For the rhinestones, I selected these light sapphire hotfix crystals. With the material sorted out, I was able to move on to creating my pattern for this project. Given the slight sheerness of my fashion fabric, I decided to make a base layer out of a plain fabric close to my skin color. This would serve as the base onto which the outer fabric would be attached to later. Nothing fancy, just a plain sleeveless dress with a V-shaped neckline at front and back, the skirt hitting just above the knees. I simply traced clean copies of my bodice and skirt block pattern pieces and modified them accordingly. In addition to the bodice and skirt patterns, I traced off facing pieces for the neckline as well. With the base layer taken care of, I could move on to the main dress. For the circle skirt, I made a cutting template according to the waist measurement of my base layer and, to conserve paper, indicated how much I would need to measure down from the template's outer edges to create a full-length skirt. In terms of the pleated bodice, I decided to reuse the pattern for my base dress and utilize the dart fullness to create the pleats. The back piece was left as is, but for the front I traced my pattern again and simply moved the fullness of the bust dart into the one at the waist to keep the side seam area smooth. To create the pattern for the sleeves, I traced my standard sleeve pattern twice, eliminating the underarm seam, and marked where the sleeve should fall open at the front and back along the arm side. After adding plenty of length, I also flared out the sleeves at the hem before connecting it with the arm side. With all the pattern pieces cut out, I could dive into making this dress. I started by putting the base dress together first, so I could attach the outer layer to it later. I placed my pattern pieces onto a beige plain weave linen before cutting them out. Since this dress will be primarily worn in summer, linen and its cooling and moisture-wicking features were the perfect choice for this layer that would sit right next to the skin. To keep the neckline and arm sides from stretching out, I stay-stitched them first before diving into the actual construction. First, I ironed on a strip of fusible interfacing to the center back edge, where the zipper would go. Next, I closed up the darts on my bodice and skirt pieces and pressed them. Then I pinned the facing pieces along the bodice neckline, stitched them in place, and edge-stitched the seam allowances down onto the facing. Next, I sewed the front and back skirt pieces to their respective bodice parts. Before sewing in the zipper, I closed the lower part of the center back seam and pressed it open, before pressing back the seam allowances of the remaining free edges. I pinned and basted an invisible zipper into the back, the color matching my fashion fabric nicely. After sewing it in place by machine, I could take out the basting threads. Then I pinned and closed up the side and shoulder seams. To finish off the raw edges, I trimmed one side of the seam allowances and folded the longer one on top before top stitching it down and closing the raw edges. For the raw edges of center back, I folded under the raw edges of the seam allowances and top stitched them down. In order to finish this base layer, I pressed up the raw edges of the neckline facings before pinning and stitching them to the inside. After pressing up the hem allowances as well, I could finish them up by sewing the hem by machine. With the linen base finished, I could set it aside for now and get started on the skirt of the outer layer. After placing the blue voile on my cutting table, I measured and tore 2 panels from the bolt and folded them in half widthwise. Then I pinned the cutting template for the circle skirt in place on the fold and measured down to mark the cutting line. Since I am so tall that I wouldn't be able to get a full-length skirt out of the width of my fabric, I cut 2 pieces out using the full width of the cotton voile, one front and one back piece, which I would then have to connect via side seams. To keep the edges from fraying, I used pinking shears for cutting the waist and hem edges. For the center back seam, I cut one of the half circles apart along the middle. Firstly, I stay-stitched the curved edge of the waist on all pieces to keep them from stretching out. pinning and sewing up the side seams, I trimmed the seam allowances and pressed them. I then enclosed the raw edges by machine, creating French seams. The center back seam was closed up in the same manner, leaving the upper part open. After thread marking the waistline with a contrasting thread, I pinked the remaining raw edges of the center back and pressed them under. I then could pin the skirt to the base layer, matching up the waistline, and pinned the open edge of the center back along the zipper. Then I sewed the voile along the waist by machine, before slip stitching the center back in place by hand. Next, I cut out the bodice pieces from the remnant fabric left over from cutting out the skirt. Starting with the back, I pinned the cut pieces to my dress form and pleated the excess fabric at the waist. Then I could place the pleated bodice pieces on top of the base dress, folding under the raw edges at center back, waist and neckline, and pinned everything in place. Next, I sewed the cotton voile layer to the base by hand, not worrying about any visible stitches since the waist and neckline edges would be covered by lace later on. The raw edges at the shoulder and side seams would later be covered by the pleated panels of the front, while those at the arm sides would be finished off together with the seam allowances of the sleeves in a later step. With the back done, I added the front bodice pieces in a similar manner. The raw edges of the shoulder and side seams were folded under and pinned over the exposed raw edges of the back pieces. After stitching the front fashion layer to the base, it was starting to look more and more like a dress. Next, I cut 2 lengths of the scalloped edging lace to go around the neckline. Since it would be a lot easier to attach the hotfix crystals to the lace pieces when they were still lying flat instead of after they had been sewn to the bodice, I added a smattering of crystals at this point in time. Then I pinned and basted the lace trims to the bodice before permanently sewing them in place. Similarly, I applied hotfix crystals to the wider lace trim for the waist area as well, before pinning it to the bodice, covering the waist seam and raw edges of the other lace trims. Once again, I basted the lace in place before securing it by hand. Now I could move on to the sleeves. Rolling out my bolt of fabric once again, I cut 2 sleeve pieces from my fashion fabric. Then I pressed the raw edges of the long sides up by a couple of millimeters before sewing a hand-rolled hem. While I do own a rolled hem foot for my machine, I have major trust issues with it and much prefer doing a rolled hem by hand. After the hems were pressed nice and flat, I could move on to the lace insertion. Cutting 2 lengths of my scalloped tulle lace, I pinned and roughly basted each strip into position on my 2 sleeves. Then I sewed the lace to the sleeves by hand, making sure to keep my stitches small and almost invisible to the naked eye. After the lace had been secured and the basting threads removed, I flipped the sleeves around and carefully trimmed away the fabric behind the lace. These raw edges were then folded back and secured in place by hand. With the sleeves still lying flat and not attached to the dress, I applied the hot fix crystals to the lace, nestling them among the cording detail. After the lace had been fully bedazzled, I finished the sleeve hem with a hand-rolled hem as well. Then I pinned the sleeves into the arm size of the dress, overlapping the edges at the opening. I sewed the sleeves into the dress and then finished off the raw edges by trimming the seam allowances of the bodice before folding the raw edges of the sleeve seam allowances over them. They were then felled down. To allow the bias of the skirt to stretch out fully, I hung the dress up for a couple of days to let gravity do its thing. Then I leveled the hem where it had stretched, cutting the excess away with my pinking shears. Now all that was left to do was a ton of hand sewing. I pinned the scalloped edging lace all around the hem, matching the lower edge of the lace with the raw edge of the fashion fabric. After basting it in place, I sewed the trim to the skirt by hand. Then, just like with the sleeve insertion lace, I flipped the skirt over and cut away the fabric behind the lace with pinking shears, careful to not cut into the lace itself. The raw edges were turned up and sewn in place, finishing the hem of the dress. Last but not least, I spread the skirt hem out on my cutting table and added crystals to the lace trim as well, finally finishing this dress. And here is the final dress in action. I am so in love with how it turned out. In hindsight, I probably could have flared out the sleeves even wider, but nevertheless I have plenty of twirl-worthy volume thanks to the full skirt. Despite all of the hand sewing involved and hours upon hours spent gluing on over 3,500 crystals, this whole project came together surprisingly fast. This dress will get plenty of wear during the spring and summer, to weddings, garden parties, and whenever I feel like living for the hope of it all. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like and let me know down in the comments which folklore dress from the Eras tour is your favorite. Follow me on Instagram for real-time progress updates on upcoming projects and subscribe to my channel to not miss the next making of video. Thank you so much for watching and see you next era.